Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. If you are a first-time listener, love to have you. Glad you're here with us. And I am not bashful. I have no shame. I am a well-dressed beggar. You see, I even have a caller on today if you're watching on YouTube. And so as a well-dressed beggar, I will ask of you, if you like what we're doing, give us 5 stars. It helps us with ratings and positions in the iTunes marketplace and others. If you're a returning listener, thank you. We're glad to have you on board. We're on a sprint, and because of you listening and because of our great guests like the one I have today, this is going to go all over the place. I'm excited about it. We've cracked the top 10 fastest growing podcasts on the planet, which is pretty exciting because there are over 1 million podcast choices out there in the marketplace today. So thanks to you. I appreciate that. Now, of course, the little quick house cleaning things. If you don't like the platform you're on today listening, don't worry about it. There's 23 of them you can listen to the podcast on. You can also get the podcast on the show's website, which is rexandrewshow.com. You can listen to the podcast there via browser, but more importantly, stop by the website because you get bios of all of our guests, and we've got a lot of really interesting people. It's all over the map. And a testament of today, it was all over the map. So furthermore, we want to thank you for tuning in. And if you like the program, please give us the stars. We're on every social media platform you can find, Rex Andrews Show. And we've been blessed. This thing has taken off and it's caught fire. We have listeners in 32 countries, 6 continents. And if I could figure out a way to fund smartphones for those penguins, I might even have some listeners in Antarctica. But anyway. All right, let's get on with today's show. It's a lot of fun. We've got a great guest here today. I always tell people, my situation is I've got too many interests for just one lifetime. My problem is just around the corner, there's another discovery. So today we've got another discovery. Interesting guy. You're going to like this. So let me give you some accolades of some of the things you've done and he's done. And this is not even close to the list. Okay, not even close to the list. So he's got an MBA. Okay, so he's an educated cat. So he's got some experience in understanding business. He is a fishing aficionado. That's kind of a tongue twister. Has fished all over the world. Okay, and that interest turned into a very interesting business on the internet. We're going to talk about that today. He has a podcast, and I wouldn't call him an old timer because he's younger than I am. But his podcast, he's been podcasting since 1998. Okay, so a true pioneer. Online pioneer too. He's done things, worked at AOL, Time Warner, big companies out there, built the largest social media platform at his time in the angler industry. He's been married for quite some time, and that might be his greatest accomplishment. Avid bike rider, business success secrets podcaster. So I could go on and on. This might be one of the longest lists, but I like guys like this because serial entrepreneurs just like different things. They hop around and they get interested, and you meet so many interesting people in that process. So welcome to the show today, this afternoon, Brandon White. Brandon, how the heck are you?
I'm great, Lex. Thanks for having me on, man. And that saying such nice things.
Well, I'll give you the friend payments after the show, I guess. So glad to have you here. And when I went through our process of booking, I just saw the interesting things you've done because you've had some successful exits. And I'm sure you're going to talk about this. When you're an entrepreneur, if you can bat 500, you're a rock star of a success, right? I mean, I've had as many failures as I've had successes. And so we'll talk about some of that today. But before we get into the current stuff and all these interesting things you've done, we like to tell the human side here on the show. We like to look at who people are and kind of get to know you a little bit before we get into other things. So I have this list of questions that I ask everybody. A little personal sometimes, but hey, that helps us learn who Brandon is. So we want to know where you were born, okay? Where you grew up, if you have siblings that survived your harassment, what your childhood and youth it was like, what kind of interests did you do, sports or theater, computers, whatever. I mean, I always tease people, it could have even been shoplifting, but we won't list the places you took from. We want to know about what your parents did or still do, if they're still with us, because influences of our family environments, we all have certain talents, but those influences and our experiences, form us a lot. So education stuff, that kind of things, was just learn some background about Brandon, who you are, because that has probably contributed a ton to who you are today. Just absolutely. So Brandon, if you could, don't forget.
Well, Rex, like I feel like I'm back in my master's degree or college with this test stuff. You told me this wasn't going to be hard, and now I got this list. But I'm happy to share that with you.
Yeah, well, and don't worry if you leave out a couple questions. I'll nail you with those. I'll bring those back up. Okay, so bring us back to the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and grew up on a farm in northern Maryland with my mom and dad. But then my parents got divorced and basically raised by a single mom. My dad was around, but certainly it was my brother, later my brother, who is a few years younger than I am, younger brother who's still around. And my mom and I grew up on a farm. And then we, after many years, moved to I guess quite not quite as big of a place, but still out in the country in northern Maryland. And I grew up as a lacrosse kid in Maryland is famous for lacrosse.
Yep.
And I had a lacrosse stick in my hand since I was in kindergarten. I was a soccer player as well, but lacrosse player, and went to high school in Baltimore Baltimore has a big rivalry of prep schools. I went to Boys Latin in Maryland, which changed my life forever. Just an incredible experience that really embraced individualism and being who you are. And they just embraced it and let you be that. And then they built it around it. So that's a little bit of my early childhood, and spent a lot of my life in Maryland. I live in Half Moon Bay, California now for a lot of different reasons, just outside of Silicon Valley. But
sure.
Maryland's where I grew up, and it's a pretty cool state.
Now, is your mom still with us then, or your dad?
Yeah, my mom was an entrepreneur in her own right. She has done 7 books. She was a writer that had a syndicated column for some papers, the Aegis, which is owned by the Baltimore Sun, and then maybe later the Baltimore Sun, and then made a complete shift in careers. And when I went to college, she decided, she was married to my dad, and she quit college to have me, and then never finished. So when I went to college, she went back and finished college. Then she went and got a master's from Yale.
Oh my goodness.
And then became a teacher for a little while, and then ultimately a dean of students of a private school in Baltimore for, I think, maybe 10 or 15 years.
Wow, what a example of success in your life. What did your father do when you were
my dad was a developer, construction developer. So he did commercial real estate. I think he developed about 3 million square feet of commercial real estate, and too many homes in the residential area to really count. And he's still around. He actually lives in Kansas City, Missouri, and I guess the best way is he does edutainment centers, which are these large construction projects that incorporate family activities. So think of it as a next step, higher level block buster. What is that place called? You take your kids and
Dave and Buster's.
Dave and Buster's, but not, think of that in a refined way in those types of projects. So my dad still does that. I think my dad will work until the day he dies. This is in his genes. So still making it happen.
Still making it happen. I think, not getting sidetracked, but I think there's going to be a lot of open retail space for those types of businesses coming up. I mean, with the things that are happening in retail, thanks to the impact of Amazon and the big players and stuff. Retail was in trouble before the pandemic, and I think there's a lot of malls that are going to be looking for things to put in the things to draw people again.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time to be alive. And you'll remember this. I would say, I don't remember when I did have a black and white TV, believe it or not.
I did too.
Yeah. So, but I would say that we are experiencing a transition from the Montgomery Ward Sears catalog days that then went really into retail and ultimately online. But some people say that retail will come back. I actually, I'm an online guy anyway, but my wife and I have everything delivered.
Yeah,
I mean,
everything.
Costco, Target, I think they do Walmart for us here,
Yep.
a local place. There's just no reason for me to invest.
Time.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I was sort of when those delivery services came out and stuff, I was sort of the, oh, come on, you got to be able to go to the grocery store and, don't be so lazy to walk around. But the minute you start getting that delivered to you, you start to realize, holy smokes, I don't have to do anything time wise. I don't have to invest my time on such mundane tasks. And so, like you, I'm an online guy, and I actually believe that in many ways, retail's crushed. I just don't see it coming back. Too many retailers started their businesses without. I'm a huge proponent and follower of Jeffrey Moore, the author of the road crossing the chasm and inside the tornado and all that stuff. And he just preaches still to today that if you're not a technology company, regardless of the type of business you're in, that you're not going to make it. I mean, it's a different world today. It really is.
Yeah, I think
So,
it's going to be interesting to see how you do impulse buys online. But it's going to
oh,
be a great time to be alive to see that.
oh, trust me, I have adult children. My children are 18 through 26. And my daughters, I think, have the art of impulse buying perfected.
Well, that's good.
I thought, not that this is important, but I thought that the clothing would be one of those things that would be very difficult to do online. But my daughters will literally buy 3 or 4 items that are close or size and that kind of stuff, and they'll try them all on and ship the ones back they don't like. Because with Amazon Prime and other services like that, shipping doesn't matter anymore. That's irrelevant, right?
Yeah,
So
there's no reason to.
no reason.
There's no reason to go through all that.
Okay, so let's skip up a little bit. You went to a fairly prestigious school there in Baltimore. Lacrosse, I believe, is close to being like equestrian. It's kind of a king sport, even though it has roots back in the Aztec days and those types of things. But you know, lacrosse didn't really sneak out west where I am now. I'm outside of Boulder, and you're in California. It didn't sneak out here until like about a decade ago. So it was a kind of a blue blood sport. East Coast, you have this idea of Ivy League schools and prep schools and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's interesting you did that. So after school, what was your next hop?
Well, that was high school. I went to college at a small school in Maryland called Washington College. And I think my mom thought that would be a good idea versus a bigger university. And I went there, and it was a great experience. I lived on the water actually and went fishing every morning, every afternoon.
Nice.
And it's a great school. It has the #1 literary award of any school in the country. I studied psychology, but I did get an NCAA scholarship for sports journalism. I wrote for the local paper and did some stuff. I don't want your listeners to at all to think that I was in the sense that I did go to some really great schools, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. But that's not because we were loaded. My mom and brother and I were pretty poor, but my mom somehow figured out how to get us there between scholarships and
Yep.
student loans and everything. So I don't want anybody out there to think that it was just this, oh, well, you got a free pass, because we didn't. I took a lot of school loans, and I worked over the summer all the time. But that's where I did my undergraduate. I was a psychology major. I was the Psych National Honor Society president. And I just loved studying humans.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to just one topic real quick. You grew up in a rural environment and on a farm. That's a different lifestyle than someone who grows up today in, say, Half Moon Bay, California, or Denver, Colorado, or Phoenix, Arizona. What kind of influences did growing up on that farm background give you as you went forward?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say before I forget is actually Half Moon Bay, believe it or not, Rex, is very rural. We are 7 miles from a packed peninsula, but here it's very rural. We actually have horses riding to restaurants.
Oh, wow.
And riding on the beach. So very, very different place. It's why we picked it, and it's a gorgeous place. I'm grateful that we're able to live here. But growing up on a farm, I tell people, I don't think there's any replacement for that.
No.
It was it was just spectacular. Like there, you were able to, we had creeks and we would ride bikes and we would hike and we climbed trees and I baled hay with the, farmer, and we had cows and we had horses, and,
Yep.
um, I was mowing the yard on a gravely, and my feet couldn't even touch the pegs. That thing was like a dangerous machine, but, um, we took things apart.
Yep.
We put things together. We drove tractors. We were driving cars because we had to drive the car because there was a truck and a tractor in the field and there wasn't anybody to drive it back. So,
Yep.
um, it was, it was a, it was a childhood I wish other people could do. And it just taught me so much.
Yeah, that resonates with me. My grandparents had a very large cattle ranch up in Nebraska, about 6 hours from where we lived here in Denver. My folks, city urban dwellers, but we spent every weekend there that we could, every summer, every school vacation. And like you, we had 3 fishing ponds, we had a stream, we ran about 2,600 head of cattle most of the time, about 150 horses, every other kind of animal you can imagine, kind of thing. You were never out of things to do, never. I mean, we could hunt on our land. You learned how to do everything, weld. I mean, my friends marvel at the fact that I can weld. I'm like, well, that's just what you do when you're on a ranch and those types of things. And so, like you, I wouldn't trade that for the world. I think the biggest thing that it helps people with is a work ethic. You know, I can remember as a kid falling asleep eating, at that time they called it supper, falling asleep eating supper because I was so tired because we worked so hard during the day. Haying, mowing, baling hay, setting fence posts, yeah, all that stuff. So I wish it was something that I could have, or was smart enough at the time to have purchased my grandfather's ranch when he retired, because it just makes a different type of person when you grow up in that environment.
And we got dirty. Like
Oh yeah,
I don't think kids get dirty enough now. Like,
no,
I mean, we had a garden, with fresh vegetables, and we grew those things, and we had an orchard with, I remember, cherries and pears and apples. And, it was just one of those things that I just think really, it was just a much different experience than what I've seen. I didn't even candidly understand how you grew up in a neighborhood. I was like, I don't, I think it's cool because you have all these people here,
yeah,
but like, how's this work? You're so close together, and it
yeah.
was a
And
very different concept.
what is there to do after you've driven down the street on your bike 6 blocks, right? No,
Yeah.
same thing. We have a very similar background. My grandparents had a huge, huge garden. And of course, there was always weeding to do in that, and you had to go out and pick your things. But there's nothing like fresh vegetables right out of the garden. He always planted several rows of sweet corn, so you just go get sweet corn up there. And he had about 20 or so trees, mostly apple, but he had a few cherry and that kind of stuff. So yeah, there was never anything not to do, and it was a different upbringing. And I cherish that, because I don't know how many people still get that, because in our modern day world, sure, there are a lot of rural people doing things, but a lot of our big acreages turn into agribusiness, and that's a lot different than the type of farm and stuff that I grew up and around. So
And no light pollution, Rex. Like,
yeah,
I think people don't understand, if you don't live in a place that's really dark, you don't really get to see the sky at night. And
no,
when you get to see the sky at night, I mean, you might even see a UFO, but those are the types of things that could happen. But you get to see shooting stars, you get to see
yes,
the constellations, and it's just an incredible experience to walk out there at night in that cool, fresh air in the middle of nowhere with only the sounds of nature,
yep.
looking at this whole expanse of something that we don't even fully grasp sometimes.
No, I agree with you. My grandparents' next closest neighbor was about 2.5 miles away, and the only light that they had at their house, unless it was inside, was a yard light out on a pole, probably about 15 feet off the ground. So we were out there in the middle of the dark. If you saw a vehicle coming, you knew it was something going on, because there was nothing. And to be able to sit out there under the stars on the front porch, front stoop at night, and just watch the shooting stars. And yeah, I can remember that, just an element of wonderment. So no, I totally connect with that. I think that very observant in there. So tell me a little bit about there's so many things we could talk about today, but I want to know a little bit about your early days in the internet, and then how did you do this whole Anglers social media site? Because I think that's fascinating in my mind.
Yeah. So what happened was that I graduated from college, and basically the truth of the matter is that I told everyone that I was going to become a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer. And when you're in college, they expect you to have a plan. I mean,
Yeah.
they expect you to, hey, Rex, what are you going to do when you graduate? So I was like, oh, I was going to become a lawyer. And it's one of those things that's all you have to say. And no one presses you. They're like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. But it didn't happen. I have dyslexia. I test terribly. I'm a National Honor Society student who can't test worth anything. And I actually went back to the tree nursery where I had worked during the summers to pay off my school loan and make money to live during college, during the school year. And then my mom, thank God, figured out that, this was not the way that it was going. This was not really a good path. I was grateful for that job and I learned a lot, but that really wasn't the plan. And she also, I think, astutely understood that, kids can go off the path and you go down this wrong path if you're not corrected. She's like, look, you've just got to go back to school.
Yeah.
Law school may not be it, but go back to school. You're going to be in a great environment. You're going to figure it out. So I went back and I applied to get my master's in psych, and I got in, and I went back, and my brother was still in college at the time. I went back to Washington College for my master's, and I started looking around for fishing reports, specifically light tackle fly fishing, which is a particular type of fishing.
Sure.
And there was no good resource, Rex. There wasn't something I was looking for. And as I canvassed my friends, they said, well, we agree, but there isn't anything, Brandon. There's just this local rag, for lack of a better word. It
Sure.
provided information, but it wasn't what I envisioned. And I just decided to make it. So I went to the local printer. I had $600 in my bank account. I figured out that I didn't have enough money to print a magazine. And I have always been a tech geek. And I started with a Commodore VIC-20.
Yeah.
Then I went to a 64. I'm a self-taught. I can write code. I don't write code anymore. I'm not even would say I'm an engineer. I understand everything, but I'm not that guy. But I started hanging out in the college computing lab, and I had been on the internet in college through the early 90s. And I realized that this was a really cool opportunity. And I was like, well, why can't I just put a magazine online?
Yeah.
So I recruited, I spent time in the computing lab. I figured out who the top kid was. I recruited him. I then got a job on a spinach farm doing finance and a whole bunch of other things to pay him. And we launched a site in 1996.
Wow. Talk about early days. I mean, that's 4 years from the .com, year 2000 stuff. Most websites are that back in that day were cold fusion. They were, hand coded things.
Oh, we flat file HTML is what we did.
Oh, flat file HTML. Wow. You had databases like Btrieve that were flat file. I mean, you're talking back in the days of what we look back now is very antiquated technology. Now, question for you, because I remember when they were talking about magazines coming online, people thought you had to have this page turning experience. Okay. So you had content on one page and you flip it over with a mouse or what have you. What was your first publication like? Was it literally more like a website, or did you go down the path of sort of the page turning technology that was out at one time?
No, I believe that they got that wrong. They didn't understand because they weren't technology people. They were publishers.
Right.
And what I recognized, Rex, was that we needed content.
Yeah.
And what I remember, and there were some early forums, they were called BBSs back then, but bulletin boards, and which actually ironically don't look much different than Reddit now. But what I figured out is that I wanted them to leave the information, and I dumbed into this candidly. Now I would look for it, but you need things on the, people say, well, I'm going to create a community site around dogs. Well, maybe, but what you need is a dynamic on the internet of regular things that change.
Yeah.
And what I'll say is that's why people read news. That's why they read sports. That's why freshwater fishing doesn't work the same way that saltwater fishing does, which is what I was doing, because tides change, weather changes, and the fish move.
Sure.
And once I discovered that, not only that, but in general, we had a very male-dominated group of people coming who have high testosterone, type A attitudes, who always want to catch the biggest fish. And I realized that if I could create a competitive environment where everybody wanted to post their picture and get attention, that they'd leave all the content themselves. And that's what happened. That's not how it started. I faked it in the beginning, but I was like 5 people on my bulletin board asking myself questions and having books to answer it. So it looked like people were there. But once it got going, Rex, I realized that the publishers were all wrong. And when I realized the publisher was all wrong, that's when I realized the opportunity was going to be there.
Fantastic. If you fast forward to today, content is such a huge, huge aspect of how we socialize, of how we get our news, all those things. It's content, they always have talked about over the last, 20 years, content's king. But if you fast forward and look at something like YouTube's the biggest content, repository on the planet. I mean, that people are uploading about 500 hours worth of content per minute. It's just crazy. And so you think about the time and effort that it took to get content created, when you were like kind of begging for it and pulling it together. Today, people are just throwing content out like mad.
Well, I think, part of the problem with today, in my opinion, well, first I'll say this. The internet really I could name all the companies back in the mid to late 90s that are the same companies today that have been modernized. Not a lot has changed with business models or anything. Technology has changed. I would argue that today we have more people. We know we have more people on the internet, but there's too much content that is intended to get clicks for the ad. Mm-hmm. And I think back in the early days, I know that back in the early days, there was more genuine content. Even Yahoo itself, Excite, if you go Lycos, if you go back to the early Netscape, the early search engines, they were legitimately producing consumable good content that wasn't clickbait. It was insightful and useful.
Yes.
And I think that's the difference that we have today.
Yeah. I think that if you look at TikTok, I've been doing a lot of research, and we did an interview recently, one of the top TikTok experts in the world. That to me, that's not high value content,
But it is entertaining. So let me say this, because people will be like, oh, well, Brandon's just an old guy. One is, I'm not that old. 2 is, I acknowledge that there is a role of entertainment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that is great entertainment. My wife watches it and I laugh at it. I mean, it's funny, but I think the difference is that it's made it so much easier to create this fun stuff. Yeah. I think the real question for these people, Rex, is how are you really going to monetize this? And is your fame dependent on that platform, which will change?
Oh yeah.
And
absolutely.
How are you going to keep your audience?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That what's interesting, until about 6 months ago, I had this perception that TikTok was literally, kids on skateboards and dancing in parking lots, right? Today, I was just talking to Kyle just recently, Landis, who we had on the show. 85% of the people on TikTok are over 24. Okay, I thought it was just a teeny bopper platform. 35% of the people on TikTok are over 35. So, and that's the fastest growing segment. So there is the entertainment value. And when my kids show me that kind of stuff, it's mostly laughing type of things and stuff. So it's really interesting to see. And as you know, whenever there are technology changes, whoever was the leader in the last platform or level of technology, they rarely ever make it to the next one. I mean, you can go back and pave the streets of San Francisco with all the software companies who were leaders at one time and didn't make it to the next level. I mean, I remember when AT&T was in the mainframe business. Okay. So, you know, it's always evolving. And I think that's what I love about this industry is it's always evolving. So let's go back to the angler story with the, your e-commerce and social media platform that you created. I'm still fascinated by this story.
Well, we started building it. We got some traction, and I read a lot. And
Yeah.
back in the day, Time Magazine used to have new and innovative people and companies on the first 2 or 3 pages. There was a section. And one day I read an article and it said Jerry Yang and David Filo had just raised about $1.75 million from this company called Sequoia, a venture capital firm, very popular, famous.
I know of Sequoia, absolutely.
I was like, well, I went back to my partner who I'd hired, and I was like, let's raise money. If they can do it, we can do it. Like we knew them. We've known Yahoo since the beginning. I mean,
sure.
If we have a big market. So I got a business plan book. Me and my now wife drove to Annapolis, Maryland to Barnes and Noble, got a business plan book. I came back, I read it. I wrote a business plan, and I literally started reaching out to people, Rex. And it was, I had no idea how to raise money, by the way, none.
Okay.
But I did reach out to a guy who was in the alumni magazine that said he was becoming an investor. I said, hey, here's what we're doing. And he was interested. And then he meets a guy. This is a great story. He meets a guy and he has lunch with him in Washington, D.C. He actually had just retired from a venture firm, which I'll tell you which one in a minute. And he said, this guy mentioned that he was looking at 2 kids who were doing a fishing site. And he's like, I fish all the time. What is the name of that site? And he said, Worldwide Angler. And he's like, well, I use that site. He's like, can I meet this kid? So I get this email from this guy and he says, hey, I met this guy who wants to meet you. Can I give him your name? I was like, yeah, sure. 2 hours later, I get an email. Hey, this is Tom. I was a partner at Sequoia Capital. I just left. You might know us. We did Yahoo, Cisco, Apple, and a few other ones.
Yeah.
And I come see you. This is real. This is
wow.
serious. So I write back, Rex. I write back, Rex. Here's what I write back. Because how do you receive this when you start in your spare bedroom and you get this sort of type of person? And I said, love to meet you. Here's my address in Easton, Maryland. Let me know. He's like, well, I'll be there tomorrow. I said, I'll see you. I'll be here. The next day he knocks on the door. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
So he knocks on the door and I was like, hey, he comes in my house, which my wife and I lived in a 1,400 square foot, very small house, great house, but small house. We were not rich. And he comes in and he looks around and he's like, well, where's your office? And I was like, well, let's go upstairs to my spare bedroom.
Yep.
And we walk upstairs. Literally, this guy's in my house. He walks upstairs. He looks around. He's like, is this all you got? I say, hey, look, I am really sorry if you were expecting something bigger. I said, he's like, stop talking. He's like, I'm just asking, Brandon, because no problem. This is how we found Cisco in their living room. And this is a guy who did it, right?
Wow.
So I'm like, holy cow. We go to lunch. He does the business plan on the back of a placemat. I write this 50-page business plan, but he does the business plan on the back of a placemat, puts it in his pocket. I was like, hey, you want to go fishing? We go fishing, have some fun. On the way home, he says to me, well, how much money do you guys have? And true story, Rex, my partner and I were trading stocks to fund our company.
Sure.
True story. And I said, well, sometimes we have 5,000, sometimes we have 7, sometimes we have 15. He's like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, we trade stocks. We have some revenue from building websites for people, but, we trade stocks. I don't know. And he pulls out this checkbook and I'm driving, pulling a boat. So I'm not really paying attention. And I look over and I see this ratty ass checkbook, like literally ratty ass. And he writes a check and he hands it to me while I'm driving. And he's like, let's do this. And I look down, it's a check for $50,000 and that was it.
Wow.
No contract, no anything, just my word saying, which I would still, I mean, that's how I do business. But that is, and he was a retired partner from Sequoia Capital.
Oh my goodness. You know, for someone to sit there and hear that story, who I have been to the Sandhill venture
3000
people.
Sandhill Road is where Sequoia is, right over the hill
Yep.
from me.
Yep. So I've been to Sandhill presenting. I have worked with every angel group you can think of raising capital. You know, today raising capital is like a full-time job. I mean, you almost have to have an executive or two that are focused on that. So to hear your
Now, I
fishing
want to be very clear. He was acting as an individual because obviously he had made some
made some
money
money
there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clearly. But yeah, no, he was one of the early, there were like 6 partners there in the early days. And he was he did that. And he is my best friend to this day, has been my mentor, best friend, like dad, everything. And we wound up raising $1 million for that round. And this is a kid who, I'm not saying I'm anything, or, you know, I really didn't, I had maybe entrepreneur spirit and it in my blood, but I certainly didn't have my MBA at that time.
Sure.
Not certainly. I absolutely didn't have my MBA at that time.
Right.
So, you know, and then it took off. So that was, you know, there's a lot of things in between, and it actually didn't work out. The market crashed in 2001.
Yep.
I bought the company back from the investors after a lawsuit and 6 other things that I learned. And then ultimately bootstrapped it, had it profitable within a few months. And then ultimately I ran it as a cash cow for probably 10 or 12 years, and then sold it to a large media company in Canada, which was my first exit.
Fantastic. Well, I guess the point I was trying to make on that is, when you are raising capital, you usually have to hustle, and you're hunting capital. What a serendipitous situation where capital found you. I mean, that's awesome. That's just absolutely awesome.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I think, and to this day, I do teach. I teach people how to build a business plan and pitch deck in 13 slides, and the sort of the magic that you need for that.
Right.
But raising money is an art as much of it is a science. And there's no book that you're going to read. Everybody is an investor.
Yeah.
A potential investor. Mm-hmm. Now you need to be very careful about picking them. But everyone's a potential investor, and especially here in Silicon Valley, but anywhere. And you basically just have to, you know, I hate the word hustle because I think it's overused and misused, but you've really just got to be determined.
Yep. Yeah. A funny site, I don't know if everybody ever knows it, but if you go to, and you know this guy because you've met him, but if you go to relentless.com, it pulls up Amazon. And you just have to be relentless. I mean, it really does. And so I always tell people, if you don't believe me, just go to relentless.com and you'll see, you know, that's the kind of attitude that it takes. So
absolutely
fascinating. So I have a question about this because I'm just a geek. All right. So, and of course, geek between you and I is an affectionate and respectful term. When you were building this angler site, how did you find your audience at that time? I mean, this was pre-social media, so we're not talking affiliate marketing driving traffic. Where, you know, email marketing was sort of dicey, you know, kinds of things. So how did you find your audience for this?
Well, the truth is that I used to, with my wife, go on to AOL message boards. Okay. And as you remember, their handle is their email.
That's right.
And we used to write the handles down on legal pads, 3 columns, all night long. And then I would email them from my local email client, and literally email them and say, hey, I'm building a fishing site. And back then that wasn't spam. What people would say when they responded, which was, Brandon, thank you so much for letting me know. This place is awesome. And I did not, I did it. So I grew that site that way, and word of mouth marketing and SEO. And I became very, very, very good at SEO. We, at the end there, if you believe the tools, Uber suggesting some other ones, even to this day, we had about $550,000 worth of free traffic a month coming from SEO. And I ranked, and it still can to this day, we still do it for Build a Business, but I can rank #1 for whatever term we wanted. And we did. And even when we raised money, we didn't spend any more than $50 a month.
Oh my goodness. That's fabulous. Man, I have to have some offline conversations with you. That's really cool. So, wow, what a great story. Looking back, what would you've done different? Anything on that? I mean, it's always an adventure of, what's the phrase that's often used in our industry? Fail fast, learn, fail fast, pivot. Anything you
Well, what
do
I did,
different?
the mistake I made, candidly, was I grew too fast and I became worldwide angler. And then when I bought it back, I realized what my mistake was, which was that we were too thin. We were eating a lot of money. And I went back to owning a very locally defined market, being the dominant player. And candidly, we were the Chesapeake Bay and the Mid-Atlantic coast. That is a huge market that you can make a lot of money in, which we did. We actually also, I hear this stuff now. I'm like, everyone's like, oh, well, you need a membership site. We had a membership site back then. A third of our revenue was from paid members that paid anywhere from $12 to $499 a year for a membership, either commercial or private. A third of it was from advertising. A third of it was from e-commerce. And companies like Strava now have that model. But it was just a great time on the internet. It was, I look back and just, it was really hard. And, closing a company and having to buy it back and redo it is super hard too. But it was just I'm really grateful for that experience. But what I learned was that we entrepreneurs want to dominate the world fast.
Right. Yeah.
But dominate your local community, because I don't care if you live in a little town in the middle of Kansas, own that town. Yep. They will tell everyone about your product and you will be surprised at who they know, especially in today's internet.
Oh yeah.
But own your local market, because they already know and trust you. And if you're solving a problem, a true problem, and they'll pay you money for it, then word's going to spread fast.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. So many people worry about audience acquisition on its global basis, but if you can captivate a very small market and do a good job, back when I started, I've always been in business development, sales, and technology. I, like you, learned to code, but I don't code anymore. I mean, I'll mess around with a little HTML here and there, but I get myself in trouble all the time. But I think the thing that's interesting is the fact that people don't understand that the world is so big, you don't have to have a huge slice of it. You really don't. There are so many businesses out there, tens of thousands, that are making money hand over fist, and most people have never heard of them. So it's a different dynamic. But when I grew up, and here's the thing I think that's majorly different. When I first got into technology in '87, we used to talk about the degrees of separation be like, 6 degrees of separation, and there were books about this and stuff. I don't think it's more than about 2 or 3 anymore, based on the internet. So if you dominate something small in a particular area, that goes crazy. It just does.
And just completely own it. And my lesson through reflection was, do not make the mistake that your ego is going to want you to make. And it worked out, because my bet was that someone, first, let me say a few things. One is, I didn't build it to sell it. I built it to solve a problem and run a good business with the belief that if you build something of value that solves a problem for people that they're willing to pay you for, of course, somebody's going to want to buy it for whatever fits into their bigger play. Right. So focus on that first, because if you build it to sell it, you're off to the moon, and you're likely, if a bump in the market comes like 2001 or 2008 or COVID happens, you're really in big trouble. You're basically crash and burn. But and absolutely dominate that. And I did, and then it came true. Somebody wanted that piece for a bigger piece that I had the vision for. And in my head, I said, I'm either going to do one of two things. I'll get bought, or I'll start buying other regional sites. Sure. And grow that way and do that. So it worked out. I'm really lucky and grateful for the opportunity that it gave me, because with that money, we sold that company on Wednesday, and we bought this house where I am today in Half Moon Bay, that Friday.
Wow. What a great story. Because what's interesting, I really look back to message boards days. It was a different internet. Now, Reddit sort of, plays in that space a little bit, but no, I mean, there were so many message and true message boards, and you could get on those message boards and have fairly deep conversations with people about particular subjects, but we just don't see that anymore. I mean, if you look at our current modern day social media, it's kind of the complaint forum. It's the
Oh yeah,
outrage.
I don't like it. I don't like the negative energy, but you
Yeah.
are right. Those conversations that we used to have, and look, I still think they can be found today in private forums that
Yep.
are password protected and that you're invited to, because I'm a part of some of them, and the conversations are real, they're deep, they're insightful, and they're fun.
Yeah.
But as it relates to everything else, you've got haters, you have you have a lot of hurt people in the world, and hurt people
Yeah.
hurt people.
Yeah.
And that's what we have. So, but it was, I mean, really, it was a cool place back then, right?
Yeah. I think in this next generation of social media, because everything evolves, right? I mean, it just does in technology. There's people who walk around thinking Facebook or Twitter or Instagram are going to be these forever entities. No, they won't. I mean, that's just the way the technology works. I think we're going to see sort of a trend of fragmentation back to smaller interest groups where people can go, and it's almost back to message board days. I had a guest on earlier today that bringing together a social media platform just around a particular topic. It's really unique. I can't talk about it yet, but he's about to bust this thing out of the closet. But I really think we're going to see that, because these big conglomerate platforms, it's just too much noise. It's just too much noise. And there's nothing that's really in depth, even in some of the private and the groups that they create. I just don't see the same things happening. And the other thing I think that's been sort of a contributor to the rash of all that is we've all become keyboard warriors and think we're tough, because it's easy to hide behind a keyboard and you could say really outlandish things with no consequences. So I just think it's interesting. I think we're going to see fragmentation, and I think we're going to see niches. That's just my
Well, yeah, and
thought.
candidly, we're just going back to where we were. And
Exactly. Yeah.
I think our secret ultimately with that, with the site, the phishing site that I had, was that believe it or not, there wasn't automatic registration. If you
No.
registered with a free email, you had to validate with me, meaning I actually emailed you, and people argued with me. I think when I sold it, they really didn't grow it since I've sold it, because they're harvesting the revenue. But I think I had 62 or 63,000 registered users. We had hundreds of thousands of users visiting a day, but actually registered users
Right.
on the site. But every single one of those was actually hand selected by me. I ran that site with me and a virtual or two assistants and a CTO, and that was it.
Wow.
Ran our own servers. But that was the key to the keeping the conversations real and the spam off of it.
Yeah.
At scale, that's hard. Look, people pick on Facebook, but what Facebook is dealing with is an absolutely incredible challenge.
It is. Anybody that understands technology, security, databases, all the things that it takes, the hundreds of servers they have to run that entity, it's an enormous business, an enormous challenge. And so, yeah, they are a big fat target. Them, Twitter, even Alphabet with YouTube and Google. Those are very, very complex businesses, very, very complex technology. So easy targets, but interesting. So I want to skip to another one. What was your next successful venture that you were able to have an exit with?
Well, I wouldn't call it successful, so I'll talk about that. I had a few ventures in between. I don't want anyone to think you had mentioned you batted 500. I am not that good. I'm probably batting 10%, be candid, but when you win, you just try to win big.
Yeah.
And you get better.
Right.
Right. When you actually sell a company, you get confidence that that you keep going, you'll get there.
Yeah.
or could get there.
Right.
But I had built a company that was a services business, and I did have an exit, but it was more of a save than it was the windfall that I had before at that magnitude. So that was my second one, was a service business. We were a software engineering company, and we did some cool stuff, but it's working in the federal government's really hard. We grew really fast, but you need a lot of capital to get there.
Yep.
And I think there was just a mismatch with me and my partner at the time, and it wasn't mean, and it wasn't ugly. I mean, it was painful, but it wasn't ugly in that way that could be. So for me, it was an exit. I got out, and I consider it a success because it could have ended bad, the route we were going. And luckily it was not long after that COVID happened. So that's where that's that's the truth of the story.
Now, I understand you do some angel investing these days. What are the areas that you keep an eye on that you are willing to throw some money into?
Well, I love the internet. I love media. Media margins are really high.
Yeah.
I think quality media people want, which we've talked about.
Yeah.
I have a investment in a company called File Finder that helps you find your files faster that you have but can't find,
Sure.
which is a huge problem.
Yeah.
I'm an investor in Nightscope, which is a robot company that it does security, and a host of other little ones. I also invest a ton in just projects that I have that I think we can have. My wife has a dog agility training business, of all things.
Oh, nice.
She's really good at dog agility. She's been on 10 world teams and did that. So these days, what I'm looking for are either enterprise software or consumer media plays where ultimately you have or have the ability to acquire customers at a low acquisition cost, and you've figured out some sort of magic to do that.
When you mentioned media, I think the door is wide open right now. I think we're at a paradigm shift where there's a lot of opportunities for media out there, because I think, not getting political or anything, but we've taken sides so bad, and the entities are getting caught not being newsworthy. They're being opinion pieces and stuff. And I've said this for probably 5 years. If there was a company that could come out and just skate down the middle and say, okay, here's today's subject, and here's how the right might look at it, the left might look at it, but here's what we see as the truth, I think that'd be the world's largest media consumed company, because I think a lot of people are just sort of tired of the sides and the vitriol and those types of things. So I think we're on I think there's a huge opportunity out there right now for media. I think
if you could facilitate actually rational humans just having a real conversation and respectfully disagreeing, but debating it, I think that's interesting. But outside of all politics, Rex, I think that we're at another turning point.
Mm-hmm.
We're about to come in another cycle of the internet and media and how it's consumed, or where how it's consumed, and the shift in consumer behavior with the generations that we have that are now willing to watch a 17-minute show or a 7-minute show on YouTube versus a 29-minute show on cable TV with 6 commercials and whatever else. I think there's a huge opportunity to create those niches again, which we used to call verticals, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
for sure. And the margins are in the media business,
crazy.
Even better than the enterprise software.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in software my whole career. Yeah, absolutely agree with that 100%. I consume virtually 95%. The only live TV I ever watch is football, because I'm a football nut. Played football in school, and boys were big at it. And that's about the only live content I watch. The rest of everything else, I'm pulling off of YouTube. It's just I go find things that look interesting. And it's odd, I think, too, that it's not just a 17-minute thing. I mean, you go watch a Joe Rogan segment that can be 3 hours long.
Well, it's because it's real.
It's
real. These are real. If you have real conversations with people and do that, I just think that people are craving that, mainly because it just candidly doesn't exist that much in society, unfortunately, anymore.
Yeah, I just don't think the canned presentation of things, goes over anymore. I agree with you. I think we're on a huge precipice of a big turning point with how content is consumed. I really do. I think and what's cool about it too, for the entrepreneur, the barriers of entry have really been removed. I mean, you take somebody that wants to start a podcast, you know, a couple $100 for a mic and some software, and you're in business. You know, you're out there. You've got platforms that will distribute your podcast show to, you know, 20, 25 different distribution points. You know,
I think that, yeah, I do. I agree with you. I mean, the iPhone 12 is 4K resolution that you can literally shoot a movie with, and with a Rode mic that doesn't cost more than $100, $200.
yeah,
You're in business on a lot of things. I think that you just have to do it, and you have to stay consistent. The interesting statistic, I was talking to a research firm because I read an article about podcasts, and here's an interesting statistics. So there's everybody throws out that there's 2 million podcasts now,
yeah,
and that they're very competitive. But the interesting part is that only 8% have more than 10 episodes.
oh yeah, absolutely.
And how many have over 100?
No, I bet
Which
it's
your show is, what are we at, 116?
yeah.
116. That's, you're probably in the 1%. So if anyone was out there listening and saying, there's so much competition, there's 5 million blogs, there's 2 million podcasts, just stay consistent and keep going. That's the difference between winning and losing and building something successful. Most of the time isn't this crazy great idea or anything. It's just about consistency.
Exactly. I agree 100%. I shadow, and I guess that's even a very complimentary term. I shadow several podcast groups on Facebook and stuff. Some of these groups will have 20,000 people in them, literally. The platform that we publish on is called Buzzsprout. Well, their Facebook group is 19,000 and change. Okay. And if you go shadow there and follow the timeline and stuff, these people are talking about mics, and they're talking about software, and they're talking about, editing and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, 99% of you are going to fail, because you really you're not understanding what this is all about. This is content. It's entertainment. It's education. Okay. If you're sitting there vacillating over which mic to use and which software editing things and all kinds of stuff, well, the biggest thing you need is good content and traffic, And so I just laugh, because I don't even feel like it's really fair competition. We throw out these huge numbers, but I know that 99% of them are going to fail, just because I see the inside of the belly of the ship from the podcaster's perspective. When you see these people, and it's just like, well, they're completely clueless. I mean, they're just absolutely, and it's not that they don't have great hearts or good ideas or anything like that. They just don't even understand. I mean,
just put something out to solve somebody's problem.
Yeah.
And they will consume it. If your audio sucks, you'll figure that out eventually, because you'll get a big enough audience, and they'll say, we love your content. Your audio sucks. Do this.
Exactly. Yeah. I have a friend, literally, I have connections to Bill Phillips, who was a high school classmate of mine, who is the founder of EAS, the creatine and all of these supplements. And he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. Now, his brother came out when they split off the company, sold it to Abbott Labs, and walked away with their first big exit. His brother went off, and these two brothers are some of the smartest guys I've ever met. I mean, just absolutely brilliantly smart. Well, his brother created this meal replacement shake. And literally, I tell you, I've tasted 100 of those. If I've tasted one, because I've always been in the weightlifting and football camp, this thing was like a chocolate ice cream. I mean, it was just delicious. He went through like 42 formulations and all stuff, but he never could get it off the ground because he was paralyzed, because he wouldn't take action. And I would go to him and I'd say, Sean, just get it out there. Just action over perfection. And today it's no longer in existence. And I bet he would sell somebody the formula, because it was amazing, and all the right stuff. But it was just the fact that he wasn't consistent. He was too much of a perfectionist. And in this industry, tech, hey, it's fail fast. Pivot, learn, fail fast. So I think it's an interesting time that we live in, of that, because the barriers of entry on so many industries have changed.
Agreed.
And I think another thing that's been interesting from a technology perspective, thanks to the pandemic, and there are a lot of things to thank, as far as what happened in human behavior. Okay, we can all sit around and businesses were blown up and blah blah blah, but I have a friend of our family who He's the IT director for the transportation district here in Colorado, in the Front Range. All the buses, trains, etc. They're closing 83% of their offices because they, for the first time, have figured out they could be more productive at home.
Yeah,
They can
go
do things.
figure, right?
Yeah.
It's been like vindication for me. I tell people, Rex, do you think that there's this thing called Linux and like 3,000 developers who never met one another around the world somehow created this without an office? It's amazing, right?
Yeah. Oh, you look at the whole open source marketplace. So I think what's interesting, you and I picked up mobile computing probably the day that laptops and notebooks were out. And, remember back to you were at AOL. Remember back to the days of the 14.4 modem, the noise, and then you thought you were cooking with gas with a 28.8. I mean, you were just a hot dog if you had that speed. And now I got gigabit service to my house. And so I just think it's really interesting that the fact that it's so accessible today, and people just, I just tell people, go after it, go chase something, because if you do it right and you stay consistent with it, there will always be a place for that.
Yeah, you'll make money. If you get an audience, you'll make money. You can make money some way.
Yeah, somehow. Well, now looking back over all your escapades and the journey you've been on, what kind of advice would you tell somebody that's just out of school or worn out with their their corporate career and stuff, and are pondering something like this? What kind of, couple little nuggets of advice would you throw out?
Well, I think if they're interested in building something of their own, to really own their own time is what I say is why I did it all. Not for the money, but to own your own time. Think about a problem that you have in your own life that's really painful, and figure out a way to solve that, and test it really fast with people and see if they're willing to pay you for it. I think a mistake people make is that they romanticize. We as humans like to romanticize things in our heads about other humans, other ideas and things. And it gets in our way sometimes of being realistic with things. But if you can find something that people will pay you for, a problem that's painful enough, then, lean into that. And if someone doesn't pay you for it, then you probably should alter your course a little bit to come up with something new. And I think that's where people get stuck, is they're like, well, I know it's a good idea. I know it's a good idea, Brandon. Well, if you know it's a good idea, then why isn't anyone paying you for it? Yeah. Well, because I can't get this perfect thing. No. I've sold things I haven't even made before. So don't tell me that. There's a way to test these things. The internet, you can throw up a web page in a second. You can create Kickstarter campaigns and things that are made out of boxes, things that my nephew's 13 years old makes and that can sell. So there's no excuse, and really just follow that and figure out your own life. You don't have to solve a big problem. You just have to solve a problem. And there's plenty of challenges, things that are broken, aren't good, aren't perfect, not just from software. I'm talking, if you build a better coffee mug, think about Hydro Flask. Hydro Flask invents a different way to hold water.
Well, okay, and let's examine that for just a second. My dad carried around a Coleman Hydro Flask and had it in a lunch bucket, and it had a soup cup at the top, and it was nothing more than a vacuum container. So Hydro Flask is nothing new.
No. But all I'm saying is that it appeared new, and he did a good job. Travis, who founded it, did a great job of and you're drinking out of, it looks like your Hydro Flask, right there. There it is. Right there. And do that. So there's no excuse. My innovation professor, Al Seegers at UNC Chapel Hill, where I got my University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I got my MBA. He and I don't have a Voss water because I broke the bottle, but he had brought in Voss water, and he said, look, don't any of you in here tell me that you can't come up with something that's interesting, innovative, or creative to sell, because Voss water sells this bottle of water for $7, and it's just a bottle of water in a packaging thing that people believe that if they are shown with Voss water, Fuji water would be another one, right? I actually think Fuji water actually does taste good. I think it's terrible for the planet footprint to get it here, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, that's a separate conversation. Don't tell me that this is water,
Yeah.
for goodness sake.
I-
And you're paying more than you are for a gallon of gasoline for water. That's a
Yeah.
commodity.
It's
So,
commodity.
if you're creative and it's not, I don't want to put creativity on the hitch because people say, well, I'm not creative. Just solve a problem
Solve
or
a problem.
make it appear to be a problem that you can solve for someone, and you can build a business.
Your water bottle story makes me chuckle because back when Starbucks was just exploding and getting on the scene. Now, I'm not a coffee drinker, just never have. It's not something I gravitated to. So I'd always get water. You go to have a meeting with somebody at Starbucks, and if I read one day, the bottle, it was bottled. It was Safeway. It was Safeway's water, and here they were selling this stuff for $2.50 or something like this. I'm going, I can go down to Safeway and get this for 45 cents. And it was literally bottled by Safeway. Now they took that off the bottles at some point in time. I'm sure they changed contracts or whatever, but their source was somewhere in California, and it was Safeway water.
There you go. I mean,
Yeah.
you can build a business. I will say this. I don't think entrepreneurship is for everyone.
No.
I take this opportunity because I think today's internet has created an experience where people believe that anyone can do it and they're entitled to it. And I actually think it's disrespectful to our profession.
Yeah.
That would be like me saying I could be a heart surgeon. I'm not saying I can't. I'm just saying not
No.
everybody can be a heart surgeon. And entrepreneurship is really stinking hard.
Yeah.
But it can be done.
It can be done. So what do you focus on most right now? I mean, I know you got your hands in lots of pies. I love that because I'm that kind of guy. I got my hands in pies. What's your main thing, your main focus that you're working on today?
Well, I have a few companies, security company that we have that does technology security and physical security, and do some real estate deals. And I created this miniature media company, I guess you'll call it, called Build a Business. And I publish an actual newsletter called Build a Business Success Secrets that's meant for entrepreneurs who want to get the most out of their time, talent, and ideas. And it's a newsletter built for entrepreneurs. Like,
oh, nice.
How to invest. I show the stocks that I invest in. I'm actually not bad investor. I did trade stocks for my first company.
Yep.
I pulled up my, I did invest in Bitcoin in 2014 and have never sold.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I calculated, I think today I'm at about 52 billion% return on that. My 10-year track record on my IRA type investments, stock investments, 56% over 10 years. So I think we get money as entrepreneurs and we don't know how to invest it. So I do that. I talk about mind, body, business, insight into our marketing, what we're doing with our paid ads and how we're running campaigns, what's working for us, and just interesting things for entrepreneurs that would improve their daily lives and improve their business with actionable things. And that's what I'm working on. And I love, I wanted to publish this is like full circle, Rex.
Yeah.
Going all the way back, I wanted to publish a fishing magazine. It turns out I'm publishing a newsletter for fellow entrepreneurs in print.
That's
in a time when there's tech. But and you only find the articles, you can't find the articles online. They're only in print.
Fantastic. I love that. Only in print. That's awesome. Well, how do people get a hold of your newsletter?
The best thing to do is just visit Brandon, BRANDON, C as in Charlie, White.com.
Okay.
That's BrandonCWhite.com. And there's a link there. You can check it out and find out more about me and whatever. I change it up, whatever I'm doing, and you'll see me.
Fantastic. What a great connection. I love your story. Man, I really connect with the farm and rural background and just all the stuff you've done. We've traveled some similar roles, but I always leave with my guests for the first time they're on the show, because we're going to have you back because there's a lot more to unpack here. I mean, that list of things I introduced. I always leave this question with all my guests. We all have this idea called a bucket list. It's things we want to do before we're, finished with our time here on Earth, and interesting things or just aspirations or whatever. Well, as you know, in the universe, there's an opposite of everything, right? So there's another list out there that rhymes with bucket, starts with an F, but I'm not going to say that because I kind of have a family-oriented show here. But I actually met and I have interviewed, he's been on the show, episode number 60, the bucket list guy. His name is Trav Bell, and he is trademarked the bucket list stuff. Well, anyway, that opposite list of the F it list, it's an interesting list because everybody always talks about the things they want to do. All right. So I'm going to give you a couple samples because I'm asking you what's on you might be on your F it list. So there's a couple things I'm never going to do. Like I'm never going to eat a sardine again. I don't need to open up a can and have something looking at me. All right. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going back to Mexico City because I went down there in some of my enterprise software days and had to hire armed guards to go to a meeting at a bank. So no, I'm not going back there. Never going to do a sweat lodge again. I tried that once. I did a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge. It was the most difficult experience I think I've ever had from a physical experience. So what might be an item or two that'd be on your effort list?
Well, I am not ever going to have a co-founder in a company where we have not spent at least 12 months getting to know one another and exploring our different ideas and approaches.
I'm going to agree with you 100%. And we're bringing back to talk about just that subject because I've seen so many train wrecks. That's awesome. Okay. Anything else?
I'm not eating lamb again.
Okay.
I don't think those are like two. I know the lamb one. I don't know why I came up with that, Rex, when you were talking about this thing in Mexico City. I was like, I'm not eating lamb. I don't like those lamb gyros. They leave a bad taste in my mouth. And the co-founder thing for sure. I mean, I know these are business oriented things, but I'm probably never going to take the money from the wrong investor. And what that means is that we're not lined up. And I haven't had a ton of bad experiences, but the one really that I remember was really painful enough that I remember it. And I wouldn't take money. I think that's a mistake that even me as what I would argue as an experienced entrepreneur, I think I get to say that after 2 decades.
Yeah.
I wouldn't compromise on that. But that's a really good question, by the way, Rex. So thanks for throwing that zinger in there on me.
Well, I'll tell you what, Brandon, the next time anybody says what's on a bucket list, or they're just mentioning, oh, that's on my bucket list, you're going to remember this conversation.
I absolutely am. I'm so grateful for you having me on. You're such a fun guy and easy to talk to. And I'm really grateful. So thank you so much.
Well, I've enjoyed it. It's likewise. It's been fun, and we're coming back. I'm telling you, if I can wrestle some more time out of you.
Absolutely. I love this. Yeah. I'd love to talk about whatever. Maybe we'll talk about co-founders or UFOs or Bigfoot or I mean.
Yeah, UFOs. We got to talk about that after today's experiencing, and co-founders. I've been around those circles where it was worse than divorces and things. And so, yeah.
Well, I think the UFOs, and look, I'm only half joking, but maybe UFOs and the wrong co-founders actually are the same subject.
I think that's probably true. Especially if you would consider the ones driving those UFOs co-founders who are really mostly just extraterrestrial beings.
I'm just saying, Rex. I'm just saying. Sometimes people transform into these things that you just don't recognize and they look alien.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, my friend, I got to wrap it up for today's episode. Thank you very much for coming on. We will have you back. Lots of great things to continue to talk about. It's always great to meet somebody that's got a lot of interesting things, and we're just scratching the surface. So thank you.
Thanks again, Rex.
Okay, fantastic. It. All right, folks, we're going to call that a wrap for today's episode. Glad to have you listening with us. Don't forget to stop by the show website. And also, too, make sure you stop by Brandon's site. So it's brandoncwhite.com. And you can get information about his programs and things he's doing, but also the profiles and biographies of a lot of the people that we interview. You know, we really try to find interesting people doing interesting things. And about 98% of the time, we do a pretty good job of doing that. So thanks for tuning in. And as always, what we say at the end of every episode is be safe, but be bold and make it a great day.